Get back, you filthy black bastard. Take one more step, and I'll blow your head off right here. That was the sentence Tyrone Davis heard as he knelt in the middle of the underground garage, the blood of a female police officer spreading beneath his hands, while the muzzle of a gun was aimed straight at his chest. To them, he was not a hero. He was only a threat that needed to be eliminated. But just a few seconds later, amid bullets tearing through concrete, Tyrone himself charged straight into hell, using his own body to shield a dying police officer while his German shepherd tore into the shooter and snapped the man's arm. And at that moment, the truth was exposed. The man they had labeled a criminal had once been a special operations soldier. The dog they were about to shoot dead had once been a battlefield K-9, and that black man obstructing official duties was the only person who saved their fellow officer's life. If you were Tyrone, humiliated, gun-pointed, hunted down right after saving someone, would you stay silent to survive or stand up to bring down an entire rotten system? Comment with your choice. Follow now, because the truth behind this bullet will send chills down your spine. Harlem at night draped the concrete buildings in a heavy gray, as if each wall had absorbed enough poverty, resentment, and suspicion to leave no room for trust. Tyrone Davis drove his old truck slowly through the narrow streets, the dull yellow streetlights sliding across the scratched windshield. He was used to the rhythm of this city, used to always watching one beat ahead, listening for one more sound, staying alert for things that could not be seen. Harlem did not allow carelessness, especially for a black man living here. Behind the driver's seat, Maya was dozing off, her head tilted to one side, her arms still wrapped tightly around her school bag. The girl had just turned 7 years old, thin and smaller than her classmates, but when awake, her eyes were always bright and full of questions. On the floor of the truck, Blaze lay low, his large body taking up nearly all the space, ears pricked, breathing steady, but never relaxed. Tyrone did not need to look to know that Blaze was listening to everything, from the tires grinding against the pavement to distant sounds echoing from the dark alleys. Tyrone gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white. He had just finished a long delivery shift, his body exhausted, but his mind still sharp. Nighttime was when he earned more money, and also when the risks were higher. He needed that money to pay off debts, to raise Maya, to maintain a fragile life after his wife died. The police had called it a random accident. 2 cold words read aloud and then filed away, closed forever. To Tyrone, it was a wound that would never heal, because he knew exactly where the truth lay and who had been protected. Red and blue lights suddenly flared behind him, reflecting into long, flashing streaks in the rearview mirror. Tyrone took a deep breath, slowed down, and steered the truck to the curb. A short siren chirped, sharp and final, like a command. Light swept into the cabin, illuminating Maya's face as she stirred awake. The girl frowned and raised a hand to shield her eyes. "Dad, why is it so bright?" Maya asked, her voice caught between sleepiness and worry. "It's okay. Just stay seated," Tyrone replied, forcing his voice to stay calm. The truck door swung open, and the night air rushed in, carrying cold and the damp, sour smell of the streets. Heavy footsteps approached. Blaze shifted slightly, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Tyrone lowered a hand, signaling him to stay calm. Frank Harlan stepped into the light, his walk unhurried, as if this street belonged to him. Tyrone did not need to read the name tag. That face had been burned into his memory through far too many encounters. Harlan's eyes swept through the cabin, lingering on Maya for a beat too long, then returned to Tyrone with a thin, contemptuous smile. "You again, black bastard," Harlan said, dragging out the words, deliberately stressing each one. Tyrone opened the door and stepped out, closing it just enough to block some of the light from shining inside. He stood upright, eyes fixed on Harlan. "I'm just taking my daughter home. Is there a problem, officer?" Harlan tilted his head, as if deciding where to start the game. He walked around to the back of the truck, tapping the cargo bed lightly with his knuckles. "Heading home at this hour? Harlem isn't safe at night, especially for people who like to cause trouble." "I don't cause trouble for anyone," Tyrone said, his voice even but firm. Harlan chuckled softly and returned to the driver's side door. His gaze dropped beneath the seat where Blaze lay. "Oh, and you've got a dog too. Your dog looks just like you, always ready to bite." Without warning, he kicked the truck door hard. The impact made the metal ring sharp. Blaze sprang up with a fierce growl, the sound loud and cutting, freezing the air in place. Tyrone spun around instantly. "Blaze, down!" he ordered, low but firm. The dog hesitated for a brief moment, then lay back down, his eyes still locked on Harlan. Maya clutched the seat, her lips trembling. "Dad, why does he hate us?" she asked, her voice breaking. Tyrone turned back to look at her, his heart tightening. He knew Maya was already too familiar with stops like this, with cold stares and cruel words. "Just stay still. It's okay," he said, even though he did not fully believe it himself. Harlan stepped closer, the distance between him and Tyrone now close enough to hear each other's breathing. He leaned in, lowering his voice, but making sure it was clear. "You should get out of Harlem before I make you disappear." Tyrone caught the smell of cigarettes and stale coffee on Harlan's breath. He did not step back, and he did not respond. Silence was the only option. Harlan straightened up, glanced at Maya one more time, then turned away. "Fine, let him go," he said to the partner behind him. "I'm not in the mood tonight." The red and blue lights faded, and the police car rolled away. The street returned to its familiar darkness, but the air remained heavy. Tyrone stood there for a few more seconds, listening until the engine noise was gone. He got back into the truck, closed the door carefully, and checked Maya's seatbelt. "He's so mean," Maya whispered, staring out the window. Tyrone started the engine, and the truck moved forward slowly. "Some people use a uniform to hide ugly things, sweetheart," he said, "but Dad will always be here." "Isadine, he would do." Blaze lifted his head and looked at Tyrone through the gap between the seats, his eyes glinting in the darkness. Tyrone kept driving, his chest heavy. The streetlights slid past, like meaningless markers. He knew the encounter had not been random, and it would not be the last. Harlem had made that clear through the voice of Frank Harlan, and Tyrone understood that his small family was being pulled deeper into a spiral they were not ready to face. The afternoon in Harlem moved more slowly than usual. The late sunlight stretched across rows of old buildings, falling on cracked stoops where children sat waiting for their parents. Tyrone stood at the elementary school gate, his back against the iron fence, eyes following the stream of people at dismissal. He was used to this scene, used to the noise of children, used to the curious looks when Blaze sat beside him, large-bodied, posture upright, eyes always alert. Maya ran out first in her class and waved as soon as she saw her father. She rushed over, threw her arms around him, her mouth chattering non-stop. "Dad, today I got a good grade in reading. The teacher said I read out loud really clearly. Oh, and I drew Blaze E2. Tyrone bent down and ruffled her hair, a smile flickering across his face before quickly fading as he sensed the eyes around them. He replied, his voice warm but measured. "Well done. When we get home, Dad will hang up your drawing." They left the school gate and walked along the familiar street. Blaze walked on Tyrone's left, keeping just enough distance from passers-by. People in the neighborhood nodded in greeting, and a few smiled at Maya. The grocery store owner called after them. "She's growing so fast, Tyrone," he answered with a polite nod. To them, he was a hard-working, quiet man, always picking up and dropping off his child on time, never causing trouble. But that fragile sense of peace was soon torn apart. A patrol car appeared at the end of the street, moving unusually slowly. The siren chirped once, just enough to draw attention. Blaze tilted his head, ears pricking up. Tyrone realized his own pace had slowed, even though he did not want it to. Maya suddenly tightened her grip on her father's hand. "Dad, they're looking at us again," she whispered, her voice edged with fear. Tyrone gently squeezed her hand. "Don't be scared. Dad's here." He said it while staring straight ahead, forcing his breathing to stay even. The patrol car rolled past, its window lowered halfway. The eyes of the person inside swept from Blaze to Tyrone, then settled on Maya. A faint smile flickered by, enough to chill the air around them. The car kept moving, but it did not leave. It stopped at the corner, engine still running, as if waiting for something. Tyrone kept walking, but in his mind, countless possibilities were already taking shape. He remembered the night before, remembered Frank Harlan's words spoken close to his ear. Harlem never forgot those who had been marked. He bent down and spoke to Maya in a reassuring tone. "Go on. Tell me more about what happened in class." Maya hesitated for a moment, then continued, trying to act as if everything were normal. "The teacher asked what I want to be when I grow up. I said I want to be a helper, like you." Tyrone smiled faintly, but his eyes remained fixed on the patrol car. In the distance, Frank Harlan leaned against the hood of another car, talking with a colleague. He spotted Tyrone from the end of the street, his gaze darkening. Still refusing to change, Harlan muttered, his voice thick with irritation. The officer beside him smirked. "Why not haul him into the station for fun? With a dog along, finding an excuse is easy." Harlan glanced over, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Not yet. Let's see how unlucky he can get." It's night. They watched Tyrone and Maya disappear behind the row of buildings. Harlan pulled out his phone, typed a few short lines, then put it away. He did not need to rush. Harlem had its own way of backing people into a corner. Tyrone and Maya turned onto the path leading to the subway station. The passage was narrow, the light dim, the smell of dampness rising from the concrete walls. Blaze slowed down, lowering his muzzle, sniffing the air. Tyrone noticed the change. He stopped and looked around. "Blaze? What is it?" The dog did not answer, but his body tensed. Maya sensed that something was wrong. "Dad, why is Blaze like that?" Tyrone pulled her closer to him. "Probably just a noise. Let's get home quickly." They had taken only a few steps when the sound of metal striking metal rang out from the underground garage near the station. The noise was dry and sharp, unlike the familiar sounds of the neighborhood. Blaze let out a low growl. Tyrone placed a hand on his neck, trying to calm him, but a heavy premonition rose in his chest. "Dad, I heard something," Maya whispered. "I heard it too," Tyrone replied. "Stay close to Dad." From the garage, voices echoed out, hurried and hard to make out. Then another sound followed, this one clearer. A deafening blast tore through the quiet afternoon air. Birds on the rooftops took flight in a flurry. Maya screamed and clung tightly to Tyrone. "Dad," she cried, her voice trembling with panic. Tyrone pulled Maya against his chest, eyes locked on the direction of the sound. He knew immediately it was not fireworks or an exhaust backfire. He had heard it too many times in his life to mistake it. A gunshot. A second sound rang out, then a third, closer together, echoing from deep inside the underground garage. Shouts mixed with the explosions, chaotic and piercing. Blaze snarled loudly, his body lunging forward. Tyrone held the leash tight, his mind snapping into a state of high alert. "Dad, what's happening?" Maya asked, tears spilling over. Tyrone did not answer right away. He scanned the area, looking for cover, looking for an escape route. The street that had felt familiar just moments before now seemed strange and dangerous. The gunfire continued, ricocheting off concrete walls, slamming into his chest like heavy blows. Tyrone crouched down, his voice low but urgent. "Listen to me. Hold Dad's hand tight. Don't let go." Maya nodded, tears dripping onto his hand. Blaze barked fiercely, his sharp barks slicing through the air, blending with the chaos spilling out of the garage. Tyrone felt with absolute clarity that this moment was not random. The watching eyes, the threats, all of it seemed to converge into a single point. Another gunshot rang out, closer this time, clearer, as if signaling that something was about to spill out from the darkness of the underground garage. Tyrone tightened his grip on Maya's hand, his heart pounding. He had not yet made a decision when that sound cut through every thought, opening the door to a nightmare that none of the three were ready to face. Gunfire erupted again, no longer isolated this time. The dry, heavy sound of automatic weapons slammed straight into the concrete walls of the underground garage, echoing like thunder exploding beneath the earth. Gunpowder smoke rose rapidly, its acrid stench spilling out through the entrance and flooding the road where Tyrone, Maya, and Blaze stood frozen. Bullets slammed into support pillars, sparks spraying in the dim light, transforming a familiar space into a deadly labyrinth. Maya screamed, her cry tearing through the surrounding chaos. "Dad, I'm scared!" She panicked, her hands clutching Tyrone's jacket, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. Tyrone reacted on instinct. He yanked Maya toward a large concrete pillar near the garage entrance and pressed her tightly against its icy surface. His heart pounded violently, each beat threatening to burst through his chest. Blaze stood guard on the outside, his body tense, eyes darting constantly toward the darkness where the gunfire originated. The sounds were far too familiar to Tyrone, so familiar they sent a chill down his spine. These were not random shots. This was an organized attack. "Stay low," Tyrone said quickly, his voice urgent but firm. "Don't look out there." Maya obeyed, though her hands continued to tremble. "Dad, are they shooting at each other?" she asked, her voice wavering. Tyrone did not answer immediately. He glanced into the garage. Through the haze of smoke, he saw figures moving in frantic disarray. Screams, curses, and the clang of metal echoed relentlessly. Then a body collapsed face first onto the cement floor, sliding forward and leaving behind a dark red trail of blood. It was a female police officer. Tyrone saw her clearly when the flash of a bullet streaked across her face. Officer Sofia Ramirez. She crumpled, clutching her chest, her legs dragging weakly as blood spread rapidly beneath her. The gun in her hand had not fallen, but her arm trembled violently, her breathing shallow and ragged. A man's voice rang out from deep within the garage, brutal and commanding. "Wipe them all out! Leave no one alive!" The voice echoed, followed by the savage laughter of those hiding in the shadows. Sophia tried to crawl toward the exit, every movement slow and agonizing. With each inch she moved, more blood spread beneath her. Tyrone saw her eyes, not the eyes of despair, but the cold focus of someone who refused to let go. She struggled to raise her gun, fired a weak return shot, then collapsed again. "Dad!" Maya tugged at his arm, her voice choking. She's bleeding so much." Tyrone clenched his teeth. He scanned the area, calculating distances, firing angles, and potential cover. Everything raced through his mind so fast, he barely registered it. He knew exactly how dangerous this was. He was in an exposed position, only a few meters from the hail of bullets. One wrong move could cost all three of them their lives. Gunfire erupted again, closer this time. A bullet grazed the edge of the concrete pillar, fragments spraying into the air. Maya screamed once more, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, help her. She's going to die." Those words struck Tyrone hard. He crouched down to look at his daughter. In her tear-filled eyes, there was not only fear, but an absolute plea. Maya did not see an officer, did not see a uniform, R, M, or a badge. She saw only a human being dying before her eyes. "Listen to me," Tyrone said, his voice dropping low. "Stay right here." "Where are you going?" Maya asked, panic rising as she saw the change in his eyes. Tyrone did not answer immediately. He glanced at Blaze. The dog met his gaze, eyes blazing, ready to charge at any moment. Tyrone placed a hand on Blaze's head and whispered, "Protect her." Blaze let out a low growl, as if fully understanding the command. The gunfire intensified. Another figure in a police uniform collapsed deeper inside the garage. Tyrone knew that if he hesitated any longer, the woman would have no chance. He looked back at Maya one last time. She bit her lip, tears falling non-stop, yet her eyes stayed locked on him, filled with trust. "Dad, come back," Maya said, her voice trembling but determined. Tyrone nodded. "I will." He stood up, his body exposed from behind the concrete pillar. Instantly, a burst of bullets ripped through the air where he had just been standing. Tyrone lunged forward, sprinting along the wall, using every narrow gap as cover as he pushed deeper into the garage. Gunpowder smoke burned his eyes, gunfire rang in his ears, but every movement was precise and efficient, as if guided by an old memory that had never faded. Behind him, Maya screamed, "Dad!" Blaze barked loudly, the sound echoing through the chaos like a challenge. Tyrone did not look back. His eyes were fixed on Sophia. She had collapsed completely, her breathing heavy, her eyes barely open. When she saw Tyrone approaching, she tried to say something, but only blood spilled from the corner of her mouth. "Don't move," Tyrone said quickly, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands already ready to press against the wound. "I'm here." Sophia looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of shock and disbelief. "Why? Why are you running in here? They'll kill you," she whispered weakly. "You need to live," Tyrone replied. "And I don't leave wounded people behind." Footsteps echoed nearby, followed by the sound of a weapon being cocked. A member of the Blood Reapers gang stepped out from behind an abandoned car, his gun aimed straight at Tyrone. He shouted, "Hey, you there!" Blaze lunged at the perfect moment, bursting out from behind the concrete pillar where Maya was hiding. The dog shot forward like an arrow, crashing into the gunman, his jaws clamping down on the arm holding the weapon. A scream of pain erupted, and the gun clattered onto the cement floor. Tyrone did not waste the moment. He dragged Sophia tight against the wall, shielding her with his body. Bullets struck, slamming into the concrete inches from his shoulder. Debris exploded outward, scraping across his cheek with a searing sting. Outside, Maya held her breath, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes never leaving the silhouette of her father amid smoke and fire. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she understood that this moment would change everything. If it were you, would you grab your child and run? Or turn back to save a stranger dying amid a storm of bullets? Ask yourself that, and consider how much you would be willing to pay for a decision that lasts only a single second. Tyrone released Maya's hand and charged straight into the gunfire, and when he placed his body between death and that unfamiliar woman, the gears of fate began turning in a direction from which none of them could ever turn back. The sounds inside the underground garage had crossed the boundary of ordinary chaos. Rapid gunfire interwove with screams, the clash of metal, and bullets slamming into concrete, forming a deadly rhythm. Gunpowder smoke hung thick in the air, making the fluorescent lights on the ceiling blur and flicker as if they might go out at any moment. Tyrone could clearly smell blood mixed with the acrid burn, a scent so familiar it was terrifying. He shot a glance toward the entrance. Maya was still hiding behind a concrete pillar, both hands gripping Blaze's leash tightly, her face deathly pale with fear. Her eyes were locked onto him, not looking away for even a single second. "Stay down! Hold on tight to Blaze's leash," Tyrone shouted, his voice cutting through the gunfire, clear and decisive. Maya nodded frantically, tears spilling over, but her hands clenched the leash, as if her father's command were the only thing keeping her on her feet. A figure behind an abandoned car spun around sharply when he heard Tyrone's voice. The man wore a black jacket, his face covered with a cloth, an automatic rifle pointed straight at Tyrone. He sneered, his voice full of provocation. "Hey, black guy, you wanna die?" Tyrone did not answer. He lowered his center of gravity, eyes locked onto the man's gun arm. The next moment happened so fast that even the gunman could not react. Tyrone yanked hard on the leash. Blaze, the resident. The dog surged forward like an arrow released from a bow. Blaze's massive body slammed straight into the gunman, jaws clamping down on the arm, pulling the trigger. A single gunshot cracked off wildly, then fell silent as the weapon clattered onto the concrete floor. The gunman screamed in agony, staggering backward, blood spraying from the mangled arm. Tyrone did not stop to watch. He rolled to the side, using the moment of chaos to reach Sophia. She lay pressed against a pillar, her breathing ragged, her face drained of color from blood loss. One bullet had torn through her thigh, another had grazed her chest, leaving a wide bloodstain spreading across her shirt. "Listen to me," Tyrone said quickly, kneeling beside her, his hand already on the wound. "You have to stay conscious." Sophia groaned softly, her eyes barely open. "Are you crazy, coming back here? You'll get yourself killed," she gasped, each word forced out with effort. "You'll die if I don't do anything," Tyrone replied, his voice cold and steady. He dragged her forcefully toward a shadowed gap between two wrecked cars, where the lines of fire were more limited. Bullets continued to slam into the outer vehicle, metal ringing out sharply. Tyrone positioned his body to shield Sophia, one hand pulling a small knife from inside his boot, swiftly slicing away the fabric around her wounds. His movements were precise, efficient, without wasted motion. He tightened a makeshift tourniquet above the thigh wound, applying just enough pressure to stop the bleeding. Sophia stared at him, her expression shifting from pain to stunned disbelief. She was used to being rescued by teammates, by people wearing the same uniform as her, not by a stranger who had charged into gunfire without hesitation. "Who are you?" Sophia asked, her voice weak but clear. Tyrone did not look at her. He checked her breathing and placed a hand on her shoulder to keep her alert. "A father," he answered briefly. The reply froze Sophia. She wanted to ask more, but another burst of gunfire erupted, forcing her into silence. Tyrone glanced toward the entrance again. Blaze was still fighting the gunman, keeping him pinned and rolling on the concrete floor. Maya had not moved from her position, her eyes glued to the scene before her, horrified, but not fleeing. Blaze, back here, Tyrone called out loudly. The dog immediately released his opponent and returned to Tyrone, standing guard on the outside, his body poised to launch again if needed. The gunman lay writhing, clutching his blood-soaked arm, dragged deeper into the garage by his accomplices. Sophia swallowed hard, struggling to breathe. "Do you know what you're doing? They're the Blood Reapers. They don't leave anyone alive." "I know," Tyrone replied, "and I know they won't stop here." Unquote. He pulled a roll of bandage from his jacket pocket and wrapped it tightly around Sophia's chest wound, applying just enough pressure that she did not cry out in pain. Sophia clenched her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. She realized that every move Tyrone made looked as if it had been repeated hundreds of times in life-and-death situations. "Were you military?" Tyrone paused for a very brief beat, then continued working. "This isn't the time." 18-1. The gunfire inside the garage began to thin out. Several of the gunmen retreated, firing as they fell back into the darkness. Tyrone knew their time was running out. He looked at Sophia, his voice low but firm. "When the police arrive, tell them exactly what I did. Don't let them drag my daughter into this." Sophia nodded, even though her breathing was still heavy. "I promise." From a distance, the sound of police sirens echoed into the garage like a new wave. Blue and red lights began to reflect off the walls, blending with the gunpowder smoke. Reinforcements had arrived. Maya heard the sirens, her eyes widening. "Dad, they're here!" she shouted, her voice caught between hope and fear. Tyrone let out a long breath, but the tension in his body did not ease. He knew exactly what awaited him. He stood up, raising both hands away from his body, signaling that he was unarmed. Blaze stayed close at his side, growling softly at the sound of rushing footsteps. Uniformed figures flooded into the garage, weapons aimed in every direction. Flashlights swept over Tyrone, over Sophia leaning against the pillar, over Blaze with his blood-matted fur. A shouted command rang out, sharp and wary. "Get your hands on the ground, now!" Tyrone slowly turned, facing the guns pointed straight at him. He kept his hands raised, palms open. He could hear Maya sobbing behind him, but he did not dare turn around. Another officer yelled, "Who is he? Why is he here?" Sophia struggled to lift her head, her voice weak but forced with all her strength. "He saved me." Her words were cut off by the metallic clicks of more weapons being chambered. No one lowered their gun. No one showed trust. Under the flashing blue and red lights, Tyrone stood alone, tall, hands raised, Blaze at his side, and someone else's blood still staining his sleeves. In that moment, Tyrone understood a cold truth. To them, he was not a lifesaver. He was an unclassified threat. The police guns were all trained squarely on Tyrone, and his fate hung suspended in the very instant in which he had just pulled a human life back from death. The gunfire in the underground garage finally thinned out, and then stopped completely, leaving behind a heaviness so dense it was suffocating. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air, mixed with the stench of blood and scorched metal. Figures in police uniforms flooded in, their boots crunching over scattered shell casings on the concrete floor, producing dry, grating sounds. Flashlights swept across every dark corner, every motionless body, every face still frozen in shock. Tyrone stood in the middle of the garage, both hands raised as ordered. Sophia's blood was still smeared on his sleeves, not yet dry. Blaze stood close beside him, body tense, eyes darting constantly with every movement of the officers aiming their guns at them. Farther away, Maya remained behind a concrete pillar, her small face pale, eyes red and swollen from crying. "Hands on your head, now!" a police officer shouted, his voice echoing through the enclosed space. Tyrone held his position, slowly raising his hands higher, fingers interlacing on top of his head. "I'm complying," he said in a low voice, struggling to remain calm. "The injured person over there needs medical attention immediately." No one responded. The guns remained pointed straight at his chest, flashlight beams glaring into his face, forcing him to squint. Another officer stepped forward, eyes filled with suspicion. "Who are you? Why are you here?" "I pulled her out of the line of fire," Tyrone replied, nodding toward Sophia, who was slumped against a pillar. "She'll die if she's not taken away right now." Sophia tried to lift her head, her voice weak but clear. "He's telling the truth. He saved me." As soon as her words ended, Maya burst out from her hiding place. The child ran toward Tyrone, ignoring the shouted commands to stop. "My dad saved her. My dad didn't do anything bad." Maya screamed, tears streaming down her face as she tried to grab her father's shirt. A police officer flinched and quickly pulled Maya back. "Get the child away from here! Don't touch my daughter!" Tyrone growled, his body tensing slightly, though he kept his hands on his head. At that moment, a familiar figure stepped into the beam of the flashlights. Frank Harlan. He walked in slowly, his cold eyes sweeping over the scene, stopping on Sophia, lying on the concrete, then shifting to Tyrone. For a brief instant, their gazes met. There was no surprise, only a cold acknowledgement. "What's going on here?" Harlan asked evenly, as if reviewing a routine report. An officer answered quickly, "Lieutenant, we found him next to the injured female officer. There's a dog, there's blood, his role is unclear." Harlan nodded and stepped closer to Tyrone. He glanced at Blaze for a moment, a crooked smirk forming on his lips. "You again." Tyrone looked straight at him. "She was shot. I saved her. My child witnessed everything." Harlan did not reply. He simply raised a hand in signal. "Cuff him." The order was delivered swiftly, without any further questions. Two officers immediately moved in, forcing Tyrone to turn around. The cold metal of the number 8 handcuffs clamped tightly around his wrists. Maya screamed, trying to rush forward, but she was held back. "No! You can't arrest my dad!" Maya cried, her voice breaking in panic. "I saved someone," Tyrone said loudly, turning his head toward Harlan. "She's alive because of me." Harlan stepped closer, standing directly behind Tyrone. He lowered his head, leaning toward Tyrone's ear, his voice quiet but venomous. "The law isn't on your side." Tyrone could feel Harlan's breath beside his ear, each word like a dull blade cutting in. He clenched his teeth but said nothing. Any reaction now would only make things worse for Maya. On the other side, Blaze began to snarl fiercely when he saw Tyrone being handcuffed. The dog lunged toward its owner, but was immediately blocked by several officers. One of them yanked hard on the leash, dragging Blaze backward. Blaze struggled violently, the growl turning into frantic barking, his large body straining in vain. "Take that dog away," an officer shouted. "It's dangerous." "Blaze," Tyrone yelled, his voice losing control for the first time. "Blaze, calm down." The dog continued to growl, eyes reddened as he was dragged away, but eventually slowed when he heard Tyrone's voice. Even so, he kept turning his head back toward his owner, the growl fading into a low, pained sound. Maya broke down sobbing when she saw Blaze being pulled in the opposite direction. "Dad! Blaze!" The child struggled in the officer's grip, tears streaking down her soot-stained face. "Leave her alone," Tyrone said hoarsely. "Please." No one answered. Tyrone was dragged away, his steps heavy on the ice-cold concrete floor. He turned back to look at Maya one last time before being shoved out of the garage. She struggled wildly, arms reaching toward him, her mouth calling out soundlessly. Sophia watched the scene, eyes wide with shock. She tried to speak. "Wait, he's not a suspect. Get her into the ambulance." Harlan cut in sharply. "This can wait." Was Intentious 7 dies. The police car door slammed shut behind Tyrone. Inside, the light was dim, the smell of plastic and cold metal filling the space. He sat alone on the seat, hands cuffed, head bowed. In his mind, only one image remained, Maya's face as she was pulled away, eyes filled with terror and despair. The car stopped in front of the police station. Tyrone was hauled out and led down a long corridor, harsh white lights reflecting off the floor. People passing by glanced at him, some with curiosity, some with contempt. No one asked what he had done in that underground garage. The interrogation room door opened. Tyrone was pushed inside, the metal chair screeching loudly as he was forced to sit. An officer removed the cuffs, then stepped out. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the empty room. Tyrone sat there alone, red marks still etched into his wrists from the cuffs. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. He had saved someone, but it seemed that act could not save him from the spiral of injustice that had been waiting for him all along. The police station corridor at night was washed in harsh white light beneath rows of fluorescent lamps that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The air carried the scent of disinfectant and old metal, so cold it made breathing difficult. Tyrone stepped out of the last office with slow, measured strides, his shoulders still tense, as if he had not yet fully believed that he had been released, even if only temporarily. The door behind him closed more softly than he expected, yet the sound still made him flinch. Maya was sitting on a bench against the wall, her feet dangling above the floor, her body curled inward, as if trying to shrink into a safe corner. When she saw Tyrone, she sprang up and ran toward him, throwing her arms around him with all her strength. The sudden embrace made Tyrone pause for a brief moment before he wrapped his arms tightly around her, his large hand covering the small, trembling back. "I thought I'd lost you, Dad," Maya sobbed, her voice breaking, tears soaking into his shirt. Tyrone bent down, his forehead touching her hair, his voice hoarse. "I'm here. It's okay now." He said it, even though he himself was not sure whether it was true. Maya clung to him, as if letting go for even a second would cause everything to collapse again. "They said you did something bad. I was so scared," she said between sobs, trying to piece together what she had overheard while waiting. Tyrone gently stroked her back, each movement slow and steady. "You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did I." He lifted his head and looked down the corridor. A few officers walked past, their eyes sliding over them, none stopping. Some looked on with curiosity. Others avoided eye contact as if they wanted no involvement. At the far end of the corridor, Frank Harlan leaned against the wall near a vending machine. He did not approach or speak, only silently observed the father and daughter embracing. His face was empty, devoid of expression, as if what had just happened in the underground garage were merely a small item on his task list. Sofia Ramirez was wheeled past at the other end of the corridor, lying on a gurney, her face pale, but her eyes still open. She saw Tyrone and Maya, her gaze lingering a moment longer. As she passed, she tried to lift her hand and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was weak, but clear. Tyrone nodded without saying anything more. He knew that Sofia's testimony was the only reason he had not been held longer, but he also understood that it did not mean he was safe. Harlan pushed himself away from the wall and turned his back on the scene. He walked slowly toward the end of the corridor, his steps even and unhurried. When he reached a shadowed corner where the lights did not reach, he pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen lit up, reflecting off his cold, impassive face. Harlan pressed the phone to his ear, his voice low, almost a whisper, yet every word carried a chilling ruthlessness. "Take care of Tyrone Davis, quickly." Duller. There was a brief pause on the other end, then a rough, low male voice replied, "Where?" Harlan did not turn around. He glanced over his shoulder toward Tyrone and Maya, sitting at the far end of the corridor, their heads resting close together. "Tonight," the call ended. Harlan slipped the phone back into his pocket and adjusted his collar as if he had just completed a minor administrative task. He returned to the main corridor, walking past several colleagues, nodding in greeting as usual. No one realized that a sentence had just been handed down, without a courtroom, without paperwork. On the other side, Tyrone was still holding Maya. He felt her heartbeat gradually slow, but inside him, a heavy sense of unease was spreading. He lifted his head and, by chance, caught Harlan's gaze from afar. In that brief moment, Tyrone understood one thing. This release was not an ending, but merely the calm before another storm. A young officer approached, his tone polite. "You can take your daughter home. We'll contact you if we need further statements." Tyrone nodded. "What about my dog?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. The officer shook his head. "Your dog is being held for examination. That will be handled later." Maya looked up. "Where's Blaze, sir?" she asked, her voice trembling. The officer avoided her gaze. "I don't know." Tyrone tightened his grip on his daughter's hand. "We'll come back for Blaze," he said, speaking to Maya as much as to himself. They stood up and walked down the corridor. The ceiling lights flickered briefly before several of them went out, making the long hallway feel even more cavernous. Their footsteps echoed steadily, mingling with those of others, yet the sense of isolation remained. Maya leaned close to Tyrone, her voice softer. "Dad, are we really going home?" "Yes," Tyrone replied. "We're going home. It Beeson." But in his mind, the image of home no longer felt like a haven. He recalled every look, every word, every deliberate silence. He knew that things were being prepared in the darkness, things that would never appear in any report. As they stepped out of the police station, the night wind swept over them with a biting chill. The city ahead was still brightly lit, traffic moving as if nothing had happened. Tyrone looked up at the dark sky, then down at Maya. She yawned softly, exhausted after an impossible impossibly long day. Elsewhere in the city, inside an abandoned warehouse, several men were checking their weapons. Cold metal clinked together. The dry sound of chambers being loaded echoed through the enclosed space. Magazines were inserted, safeties clicked off. A blunt voice spoke. "The target is one man and a child." "Location?" another asked. "Not yet confirmed, but it will be done tonight." Back outside the police station, Tyrone lifted Maya into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes already closed. He walked slowly, unaware that each step was being watched. The streetlights behind them stretched their shadows into warped shapes on the pavement, as if foreshadowing a path with no safe turn left. Was saving a police officer worth trading his own life for? The question hung in the air, unanswered. All that was certain was that from this moment on, Tyrone Davis had no way back, and the gears of fate had locked him into a hunt where the one who gave the order remained in the light of power while the victims were steadily pushed into the shadows. Tyrone's old apartment was on the third floor of a building faded with years of wear. The staircase was narrow, the iron railing icy to the touch, and every footstep echoed back from the damp, mold-stained walls. Tyrone unlocked the door and gently ushered Maya inside first. The girl stepped over the familiar threshold and let out a breath, as if she had just returned from a long nightmare. But Tyrone did not. He paused for a beat, listening to the hallway behind him, before closing the door. Inside, the apartment was strangely quiet. The familiar smell of old wood and cheap soap made Maya feel safer. She set her school bag down on a chair and looked around. "Where's Blaze, Dad?" Maya asked, her voice still tired, but full of expectation. Tyrone took off his shoes and placed them neatly in the corner. "Blaze is staying where they're holding him. Dad will pick him up soon." He said it, trying to keep his voice steady. But when he turned away, he clenched his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The apartment was missing a familiar rhythm, missing the steady breathing of the dog guarding the door, missing the fragile sense of safety Blaze had brought. Maya climbed onto the sofa, curled her legs up, and pulled a thin blanket over her shoulders. "I'm hungry," she said softly, "but I'm really tired." "I'll make you something to eat," Tyrone replied. He went into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at the space inside longer than necessary. His mind was still in the police station hallway, in Harlan's eyes, in the phone call he had not heard, but somehow felt. He took out a leftover container from the day before, heated it, and set it on the table. The buzz of a phone vibration rang out, dry and sharp in the quiet space. Tyrone flinched. He looked down at the screen. An unfamiliar number. He hesitated for a beat, then answered. Silence on the other end. Only very faint breathing, then the call disconnected. "Dad, who was that?" Maya asked from the sofa. "Wrong number," Tyrone replied, placing the phone face down on the table. But the unease inside him refused to settle. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly, looking down at the street below. Streetlights cast blotchy reflections across the wet pavement. A dark-colored car was parked across the street, engine still running. Lights off. It had been there too long for a temporary stop. Tyrone stared at it, memorizing every detail. The position of the wheels, the angle of the parking, the distance to the building entrance. He slowly drew the curtain closed again, careful not to let Maya notice the change in his eyes. Inside the dark car, two men sat in silence. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror. "Is that him?" he whispered, his voice low. The man in the passenger seat looked up at the third-floor window, where the light had just gone out. "That's him. There's a kid with him." "How do we do it?" the driver asked. "Wait for the signal," the other replied. They said, to make it fast. Back in the apartment, Tyrone set the bowl of food in front of Maya. She took a few bites, then set the spoon down. "Dad, will that bad police officer apologize to us?" Maya asked, her innocence painful to hear. "That policewoman said you were a good person." Tyrone sat down across from her, his expression softening for a moment. He chose his words carefully and slowly. "Not everyone who wears a uniform is a good person, sweetheart." He paused, then added, "But not everyone who wears a uniform is a bad person either." Maya nodded, though she did not fully understand. "Then is Blaze scared?" she asked next. "Blaze is very strong," Tyrone answered. "He knows how to protect himself. Is amenable." He stood up and cleared the dishes, his ears still straining to listen. Outside, wind moved through the hallway, carrying very faint footsteps. Tyrone turned off most of the lights, leaving only the living room illuminated. He stepped to the door and placed his hand on the handle, feeling the cold metal under his palm. The sound of metal touching metal came from the hallway, very faint, but clear enough to someone who knew how to listen. A familiar clicking sound, the noise of a magazine being loaded into a gun. Tyrone remained still. His heartbeat slowed strangely. Everything in his mind lined up neatly, as if a part of his former self had just been awakened. Maya looked up, sensing the change. "Dad, is someone out there?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Tyrone turned back, moved quickly to her, and placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Go into the bedroom, lock the door, hide under the bed, do exactly what Dad says." His voice was low and firm. "What are you doing, Dad?" Maya stood up in panic. "Listen to me," Tyrone said, his eyes serious but completely calm. "I'll call you when it's safe." Maya bit her lip, tears welling up, but she nodded. She ran into the bedroom and closed the door, the soft click of the lock following. Tyrone remained standing in the middle of the living room and took a deep breath. He looked around, gauging the distance from the front door to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the back window. The space was cramped, with little cover, but he knew every corner of this apartment. Outside in the hallway, the footsteps stopped right in front of the door. A whispered voice came through the thin wooden barrier. "This is the one." A foot suddenly slammed hard into the door. The sound of wood cracking rang out, the hinges shuddering violently. Tyrone stepped back half a pace, his hand gripping a nearby chair. The apartment door was being forced in from the outside, and in that moment, the Harlem night was no longer a vague stretch of darkness. It had come all the way here, carrying a silent kill order, ready to pour into the small space where a father stood between the danger and the bedroom door of his child. The white lights of the hospital room shone straight down onto the ceiling, cold, and even enough to make Sofia Ramirez wake with a sense of disorientation. She blinked several times, trying to focus. The familiar smell of antiseptic filled her lungs, accompanied by a dull ache spreading from her chest and thigh. She took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously gripping the bedsheet, as if she needed something solid to prove that she was still here. Fragments of memory came rushing back. Gunfire echoing off concrete, flashes of fire in the darkness, a fellow officer falling, then the icy sensation as her body hit the cement floor. And in the middle of it all, one face appeared more clearly than anything else. A black man, his eyes focused to the point of coldness, his hands smeared with blood, yet steady, as he pulled her out of the line of fire. Sofia swallowed hard and turned her head as she saw a doctor enter the room. "How long have I been here?" she asked, her voice hoarse but alert. "Nearly 12 hours, the doctor replied. "You lost a lot of blood, but you are out of immediate danger." Sofia nodded, then asked at once, without preamble, "Where is the black man who saved me?" The doctor hesitated slightly, glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "You should rest. Other matters can wait." "I need to know," Sofia said, her eyes never leaving his. "Where is he?" The door opened, and a colleague stepped in, carrying a file folder. He paused when he saw that Sofia was awake, then forced a smile. "Hello, that's good news." "Answer me," Sofia said bluntly. "Where is the man who pulled me out of the garage?" The colleague faltered, his gaze shifting away. "He is being questioned," Sofia frowned. "Why?" "Procedure," he replied, his voice lacking conviction. The scene was complicated. There were weapons, there was blood. "Oh," Sofia tilted her head and looked straight at him. "Because he is black?" The air in the room grew heavy. The colleague was silent for several seconds, then spoke quietly. "Sofia, you know how it is. Nothing is simple." "It is very simple," Sofia said, her voice tightening. "He saved me. If not for him, I would have died on that cement floor." The colleague did not argue. He set the file folder on the table and spoke quickly. "Just rest. We will handle it. Even in the do-better on the 20 dunas." Sofia watched him leave the room. The door closed, leaving her alone with the steady beeping of the heart monitor beside her. She closed her eyes, but her mind refused to settle. Images from the underground garage began to rearrange themselves into a more coherent sequence. She remembered clearly the moment they entered the garage. The formation had been planned, the approach defined, and the security cameras were supposed to be operating. Yet when the shooting started, the red warning light indicated that the cameras were off, not a malfunction, not a coincidence. The thought had crossed her mind, even as she lay on the cement floor, but but everything had been too fast, too painful to examine further. The cameras were turned off, Sophia whispered, opening her eyes to stare at the ceiling. Only someone high up could do that. The thought made her heart beat faster. She closed her eyes again, sifting through memories of recent reports. Crates of weapons reported missing. Inventory forms bearing familiar signatures, the times she had raised questions and received only a shake of the head or a subtle warning to stop. She had set it all aside for lack of proof. Now, every piece was starting to fall into place. Sophia pushed herself upright, ignoring the surge of pain. She reached for the phone on the table beside her bed. The screen lit up, reflecting a pale face, but eyes that had changed. She scrolled through her contacts and stopped at an old name. Someone in the technical department she had helped a few years earlier. She placed the call. The other end answered after 2 rings. "Sophia? My God, you're still alive? I need help," Sophia said without hesitation. "Right now. You're in the hospital," the voice lowered. "What's going on?" "Help me retrieve the system logs for the underground garage cameras from last night," Sophia said. "Who accessed them? Who shut them down? And at what time?" There was a brief silence on the line. "Do you know how sensitive that is?" "I do," Sophia said, "but I need the truth." "All right," the person sighed. "Give me some time." Sophia ended the call and set the phone down, her heart racing. She leaned back against the pillow, but her mind kept working. She thought of the man who had saved her, the way he moved, the way he bandaged her wound, the calm that made no sense amid gunfire. That was not the reaction of a panicked civilian. That was instinct, honed and trained. The door opened again. A female nurse entered to check the IV. "You should rest," the nurse said gently. "You need to recover." "I will," Sophia replied, then asked, "Where are the female officers who were injured with me?" "3 are in another room," the nurse answered. "1 did not make it." Sophia closed her eyes for a moment. She took a deep breath, feeling a sharp pain flare in her chest. Every death in the force left a scar, but this one carried the added weight of betrayal. The phone vibrated softly. Sophia opened her eyes, her heart pounding harder. A message had arrived from the person she had just called. A single, concise line appeared. "I have the logs. Sending them now." She opened the attached file. A list of access records appeared, each line marked with timestamps and user codes. Sophia scrolled down, her eyes moving quickly, then slowing when she saw a familiar name, Frank Harlan. She read it again to be sure she was not mistaken. The access time matched exactly when her team entered the garage. High-level clearance. No maintenance order recorded. Sophia let the phone fall onto the bed, her hand gripping the edge tightly. She whispered, her voice trembling with anger, "It was you." End quote. Everything suddenly became painfully clear. The ambush, the disabled cameras, the Blood Reaper's weapons, the haste in detaining the man who had saved her. None of it was random. It was a straight line, leading to a single name. Sophia leaned her head back and stared at the ceiling once more. She knew that from this moment on, she had crossed a line she could not step back over. She also knew that if she stayed silent, that man would disappear, and the truth would be buried yet again. She picked up the phone, opened her contacts, and searched for another number. Her eyes hardened with resolve. Outside the window, the city moved as usual, but for Sophia Ramirez, tonight marked the opening of another battle, quieter, more dangerous, and aimed straight at the heart of the power she had once trusted. The apartment door had barely shuddered from the first kick when Tyrone acted. He spun around, pulled Maya tight against his chest, his voice low but decisive. "Stay with me. Don't look back." She nodded, her small hand gripping his jacket. The hallway ahead was dimly lit, the lights flickering as if about to die. Tyrone did not run toward the front door. He veered sharply toward the rear stairwell, a place few people noticed, a route he had calculated in his mind many times, but never thought he would have to use. Heavy, hurried footsteps thundered behind them. A man's voice shouted through the sound of splintering wood. "Don't let him get away!" The sound slammed straight into Tyrone's chest, familiar in a terrifying way. He knew that voice did not belong to a police officer. There was no hesitation, no restraint of law enforcement. This was the voice of someone following orders. The stairwell was narrow, the metal railing icy to the touch. Tyrone guided Maya down step by step, his breathing steady, his eyes sweeping every blind corner. He stopped at the landing and pulled her tight against the wall. "Stay behind me." Maya obeyed, her lips pressed together, tears shimmering but not falling. She did not cry, only breathed fast, her eyes clinging to every movement her father made. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, a gun aimed downward. "Come out!" he barked. "You're done!" Tyrone stepped halfway into view, raising his left hand while his right held Maya's shoulder behind him. "There's a child here," he said, his voice deep and steady. "If you want to shoot, shoot me." The assassin sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Tyrone did not wait for the first shot. He lunged forward in the instant, before the gun fully aligned. The movement was clean and fast, his grip locking the man's wrist and forcing the barrel off target. The gun went off, the bullet slamming into the ceiling as plaster rained down. Tyrone twisted, stripped the weapon away, and slammed the man hard into the railing. The impact was strong enough to leave him stunned, his breath caught in his throat. "Keep going," Tyrone said to Maya, without turning around. She slipped past him, her legs trembling but her pace unbroken. Another man appeared from below, gun raised. Tyrone hurled the weapon he had just taken, smashing it into the man's wrist. He cursed and staggered. Tyrone did not slow down. He pulled Maya through, pressed her tight to the wall, and used his own body as a shield. He could hear her heartbeat clearly, fast but steady. Maya looked at him, eyes red but resolute, making no sound. They burst out the back exit, night air slashing across their faces. The alley was narrow, damp, and dark. Tyrone turned sharply, changed direction again and again, leaving behind shouts and pursuing footsteps. He knew how to shake a tail, knew when to stop and when to sprint. Skills forged in another life returned now, sharp and merciless. Across the city, Sofia Ramirez sat upright on her hospital bed, her crutches propped beside it. The pain was still there, flaring whenever she moved, but it was not enough to pull her away from the thoughts surging through her mind. The phone on the table vibrated softly. She picked it up and listened without speaking. On the other end, Frank Harlan's voice came through, low and calm. "The body has to disappear before morning." Sophia clenched the crutch until her knuckles turned white. She heard the rustle of paper, the familiar sound of footsteps in an office, and then the call ended. She set the phone down, her eyes bloodshot, her breathing growing heavy. That sentence left no room for innocence. It was a verdict. She remembered Tyrone's face in the garage, the way he stood in front of her, the way he commanded the dog, the way he never panicked. She remembered the promise she had made, and she remembered the camera access list, the name that had appeared like a knife. Sophia pushed herself up with the crutches. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse but firm. "Not this time. I'm not staying quiet." She made another call, brief and discreet. "I need a small, stable listening device, and I need it now." She paused for a beat. "Schedule me to come into the office early in the morning. Say it's for a file review." In the dark alley, Tyrone stopped behind an abandoned metal door. He placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded, tears soaking into his sleeve. "I'm scared, but I didn't cry," she said softly. "I know," Tyrone replied. He pulled her close and listened. The pursuit sounded farther away now, but it was not gone. He scanned the area, choosing the next route. There was no room for mistakes. At the hospital, Sophia slipped on her jacket, hiding the small device in her pocket. She looked into the mirror, her face pale, but her eyes changed. She knew the price of moving forward. She also knew the price of silence was higher. Two threads of events ran side by side through the night. A father leading his child away from an invisible blade. A policewoman tracing the rot of corrupted power. The city did not sleep, and the truth began to stir. If you were Sophia, would you look away to protect your career or burn the entire system down? Ask yourself and keep watching, because once the decision is made, there is no turning back. In a quiet hallway, Sophia stopped in front of a familiar office door. She touched her jacket pocket, where the listening device lay still. The decision was made. She took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside, beginning the opening move in a game where the one giving orders believed himself beyond all sight. The car was parked in the hospital's underground lot, the engine off, yet the space inside still seemed to vibrate with the rhythm of Sofia Ramirez's heartbeat. She sat motionless in the driver's seat, her crutch neatly placed beside her. the dashboard lights casting a pale glow over her drawn, hardened face. A tiny listening device, no larger than a fingertip, lay in her jacket pocket. Having completed its first task, Sophia plugged in her earphones and pressed replay. Frank Harlan's voice came through, low and steady, as if he were talking about a trivial errand. "The money's in the account, right?" There was a brief pause. Then another voice replied, hoarse and subdued, "Enough. This batch is clean." Harlan let out a dry chuckle. The sound sent a chill down Sophia's spine. "Good. Don't let a single piece go missing. The Blood Reapers pay on time. Deliver the exact count." Sophia tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She caught every word, every breath. Harlan mentioned the police armory, mentioned delivery schedules, and mentioned routes that only someone with authority would know. Everything flowed from his mouth as lightly as a casual memo. The other voice spoke again, this time slower. "What about the black guy?" Harlan did not answer immediately. Sophia heard the faint scrape of a chair, the rustle of paper. Then his voice rose again, no longer amused. "He knows too much. It's cessitas of the taken dollars for deported to..." One short sentence, enough to seal every doubt. Sophia pulled out the earphones and set them on the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. She took a deep breath, forcing her hands not to shake. What she had just heard was no longer speculation, no longer instinct. It was evidence. She replayed the recording, listened again, then a third time, committing every detail to memory. The timing, the voices, the keywords, Blood Reapers, armory, accounts, and the name was never spoken, yet understood by anyone who heard it. Sophia opened her phone and accessed the internal financial system using a secondary account she kept hidden. Streams of data appeared, transfers lining up one after another, steady, perfectly matching the time markers Harlan had just mentioned. She scrolled down, her eyes stopping on sums far larger than normal. The recipient was buried behind layers of shell companies, but the money trail was all too familiar to someone who had once investigated financial crimes. She went numb for several seconds, not because of the amount, but because of the recklessness. Harlan was not merely abusing his authority. He treated the system like personal property and treated human lives like operating costs. Sophia shut off the screen and leaned back against the seat. Pain flared from her wound, but it was not enough to pull her out of the torrent of thoughts crashing through her mind. She thought of Tyrone, of Maya, of the night before in the underground garage. She thought of the words, "He knows too much," and understood that they were a sentence already signed. She opened her phone again, this time accessing the old case archive. The case of a woman shot dead during a robbery was ruled a random accident. A thin file, a quick conclusion, few questions asked. Sophia scanned page after page, line after line, signature after signature. There were strange gaps, details deliberately left unaddressed. She zoomed in on a crime scene report. Time, witnesses, vehicles involved. Then she saw a name in the appendix, a place few ever looked. Frank Harlan's son, a person of interest in a drunk driving incident near the area of the murder, was briefly noted, then erased from all subsequent documents. Sophia exhaled softly, her throat going dry. She opened more attachments, compared timelines, and cross-checked locations. Every arrow pointed in the same direction. The case had not been closed for lack of evidence, but because someone did not want it to exist. She remembered Tyrone's eyes as he was handcuffed, remembered Maya crying out for her father. Everything snapped into a complete and brutal picture. Harlan was not just selling weapons to a gang. He had covered up an old crime, protected his own blood, and was willing to kill anyone who stood in the way. Sophia turned off the phone, opened the car door, and stepped outside. The night air was cool, heavy with the smell of smoke and gasoline. She leaned against the car for a moment, letting the dizziness pass, then straightened up. Her crutch tapped lightly against the concrete, each step firm. She called the technician again. "I need copies of the transaction logs, digital signature verification, and a certified timestamp," she said. "Send them to my secure account." There was hesitation on the other end. "Sophia, you're poking a hornet's nest." "I know," she replied, "and I need everything clean." She ended the call, got back into the car, and sat still. In a rare moment, she allowed herself to think about the consequences. Her career, her colleagues, even her life. All of it was on the table, but there was something else there too, heavier than all of it, the truth. Sophia played the recording one more time, stopping exactly at Harlan's line. "He knows too much," she whispered, her voice rough but clear. "No, you're the one who knows too much." She locked the phone, slipped the listening device back into her pocket, and stared through the windshield. The city was still bright, still loud, as if nothing beneath the surface were cracking apart. But for her, every boundary was now visible. Sophia rested her head against the seatback and closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, her gaze had changed. She knew the next step would no longer be quiet. She also knew she needed one more thing, a living witness, someone who had been pushed into the shadows by the system's silence. She whispered, as if speaking to herself and to the names in the files. "He's not just a mole, he's a murderer. I have." Outside the parking lot, a distant siren echoed. Sophia started the engine and drove away, carrying evidence that, once brought into the light, would make an entire structure of power tremble. And somewhere in the city, a father was on the run with his daughter, unaware that the truth had begun to surface, piece by piece, sharp and unforgiving. The waiting area at the end of the hospital corridor was unusually quiet. White lights reflected off the polished floor, stretching thin, distorted shadows along the length of the hall. Tyrone sat close to the wall, his hands clasped together, knuckles standing out from the tight grip. Maya sat beside him, resting her head against her father's shoulder, eyes wide but silent. The child had grown accustomed to staying quiet when adults talked, as if silence itself were a form of self-protection. Sophia entered, leaning on crutches, her pace slow but resolute. She stopped a few steps away from the father and daughter, not approaching right away. She understood that this distance needed to be respected. Tyrone looked up, his gaze guarded, making no effort to hide it. "I don't trust the police," Tyrone said quietly, his voice low but firm. "I've paid too high a price for that trust." Sophia nodded, offering no argument. "I'm not like him," she replied directly, "and I didn't come here to arrest you." Tyrone studied her for another moment, then turned to Maya. The child looked up at him, as if waiting for a signal. Tyrone exhaled slowly. "You want the truth," he said. "I'll tell it, but not to beg for pity." Sophia pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, placing her crutches beside her. "I need every detail," she said. "What you know could save lives." Tyrone looked down at the floor, his voice growing heavier, steadier, and waited. He spoke of nights driving his truck along routes around the warehouse, of being stopped without reason, of flashlights shining straight into Maya's face, of questions repeated over and over as if rehearsed. He spoke of being detained longer than necessary, of threats spoken quietly enough that no one else could hear. Every time it was near the warehouse, he said. Every time it was the same person. Sophia did not interrupt. She absorbed every point, every detail. "Frank Harlan," she said, not as a question. Tyrone nodded. "He knew my schedule. He knew I drove at night. He knew I couldn't do anything except swallow my anger." Maya shifted. She looked up, her eyes turning toward Sophia. "I remember that man," Maya said, her voice small but clear. "He smiled when Mom died." The air in the room suddenly froze. Tyrone turned sharply toward his daughter, his hand trembling slightly. "Maya," he said hoarsely, "what do you remember?" Maya blinked, as if searching for an old image. "That day," she said, "I was sitting in the car. Mom was lying on the road. Many men were wearing the same kind of clothes. That man was standing far away, saying something to someone else, and then he smiled." She swallowed. "I remember his face clearly." Sophia froze. She crouched down to Maya's eye level. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice softer but no less serious. Maya nodded, her shoulders trembling but her gaze steady. "I'm sure," she said. "I remember because he looked at Dad, then smiled, like he knew Dad couldn't do anything." Tyrone closed his eyes for a moment. Images he had tried to bury surged back, sharp and painful. He opened his eyes and looked at Sophia. "I told them that truth before," he said. "They said I was grieving and imagining things." Sophia stood up, took a few steps, then turned back. She knew this moment allowed no hesitation. "We end him," she said, looking straight at Tyrone. "With the truth." Tyrone did not answer immediately. He looked at Maya, then at Sophia. "I won't let her be dragged into this," he said. "She's already endured enough." Sophia nodded. "I will protect her," she said. But her words are the piece he never expected. The waiting room door opened. A young police officer stepped in and handed Sophia a sheet of paper. "An emergency meeting has been called," he said. "The entire force." Sophia took the paper and scanned it. Her eyes sharpened. "Perfect timing," she said quietly. She turned to Tyrone. "You'll be placed under witness protection. Temporarily." "Temporarily," Tyrone repeated, his skepticism undisguised. "Long enough to bring the truth into the light," Sophia replied. Maya took her father's hand. "Dad," she said, "if we speak up, will Mom get justice?" Tyrone bent down and pulled her into his arms. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I do know that staying silent won't bring Mom back." Sophia stood near the door and took a deep breath. She knew that once the meeting room door opened, everything would shift. She also knew there would be people trying to stop her. But now, she had evidence, testimony, and a witness no one could dismiss. Out in the corridor, hurried footsteps echoed. Sophia's phone vibrated. A short message appeared. 10 minutes. Sophia closed the phone and looked back at the father and daughter. "When I call on you," she said, "say exactly what you told me. No more, no less." Tyrone nodded. "We'll tell the truth." Sophia opened the door. Corridor light flooded into the room, brighter, colder. She stepped out first, her crutches tapping rhythmically against the floor, each step like a declaration. Behind her, Tyrone led Maya by the hand, gripping tightly, moving slowly, but without retreat. At the end of the corridor, a group of officers stood waiting. No one spoke, but all eyes were directed toward the meeting room. Sophia knew this was the point of no return. She glanced briefly at Tyrone, then looked straight ahead. An emergency, full-force meeting had been convened, and with it, a great crime was about to be dragged out of the shadows by the trembling yet resolute voice of a child, and by the determination of those who had chosen to remain silent no longer. The large conference room of the police headquarters was submerged in a cold white light, cast down upon faces more accustomed to giving orders than to listening. The commissioner sat at the head of the table, both hands resting on the polished wooden surface, his stern gaze sweeping across everyone present. The atmosphere was so heavy that even the sound of a chair shifting rang out clearly. Frank Harlan sat off to one side, leaning back in his chair, his familiar calm demeanor still intact, as if this were merely another irritating meeting in his long reign of power. The door opened. Sofia Ramirez entered, leaning on crutches, her steps slow but steady. She stopped in the middle of the room and placed a small voice recorder on the table. Tyrone and Maya stood near the door, under the watch of an officer. Tyrone rested his hand on his daughter's shoulder, clearly feeling her breathing begin to quicken. Sophia did not waste time. She pressed the play button. Frank Harlan's voice filled the silent room, clear and merciless. "Has the money been transferred into the account yet?" Several officers turned their heads toward Harlan. He frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing his eyes. The recording continued. It mentioned the Blood Reapers, the police weapons depot, shipments disappearing exactly on schedule. Each sentence landed like a hammer, striking the invisible table of power. Sophia stepped forward and signaled for the technical team to turn on the screen. Figures appeared. Transfer histories, intermediary accounts, endema stamps, matching the periods when weapons went missing. The commissioner leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. A few commanders whispered among themselves, skepticism beginning to give way to shock. Frank Harlan sprang to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. "Fabrication!" he shouted. "All of this is fabricated. You have no right to use this against me." Sophia looked at him, her gaze cold and unwavering. "Then, what about Tyrone's wife?" she asked, her voice not loud, but clear enough for the entire room to hear. Harlan froze for a very brief moment. In that instant, the confidence on his face cracked. "That matter was closed," he replied hurriedly. "A random accident." Sophia turned her head. "Maya," she called softly. The entire room turned. Maya stepped away from her position beside her father. She was small among the tall uniforms, but her steps did not falter. Tyrone wanted to pull her back, but he stopped himself. He saw in his daughter's eyes a courage that made his chest tighten. Maya raised her hand, her fingers trembling slightly, but pointing straight at Harlan. "That man," she said, her voice high and clear. "I remember him. He smiled when my mother died." The air in the room seemed to freeze solid. A few officers drew sharp breaths. The commissioner stood up abruptly. Frank Harlan went pale. He shook his head repeatedly, his voice breaking. "The child was coached to lie. This is a dirty trick." Sophia placed another folder on the table. "This is an old report," she said. "Your son's name appears in the appendix. Driving under the influence, near the scene, then erased from the record. You used your authority to cover it up." Harlan stepped back, his eyes darting around, as if searching for an escape. "You don't understand what you're doing," he yelled. "I kept this system running." The commissioner signaled. Two officers stepped forward. The dry metallic click of handcuffs echoed as they closed around Frank Harlan's wrists. He struggled helplessly, his shouting gradually swallowed by a room full of cold, unblinking stares. Tyrone stood frozen. Then his legs seemed to give way. Maya turned back and wrapped her arms tightly around him. For the first time in many years, Tyrone cried. Not loud sobs, but silent tears falling onto his daughter's hair. He bowed his head, his forehead touching hers, his breath shaking from emotions held in for far too long. Sophia stood quietly, watching the scene. She then turned to the commissioner. "I take responsibility for all investigative actions," she said, "but the truth must be made public." The commissioner nodded, his voice low. "You did the right thing." Frank Harlan was led away. The conference room door closed behind him, ending a dynasty of power built on silence and fear. Outside, the early morning sunlight of Harlem began to pour through the tall windows. Tyrone led Maya out of the building. Blaze was returned to them, walking at their side, his tail gently wagging. There were no more pursuing footsteps, no more watchful eyes. Only the familiar street is waking up. Maya looked up at her father. "Are we going home, Dad?" Tyrone nodded, gripping her hand more tightly. "We're going home." In the Harlem dawn, three figures walked slowly forward, no longer fleeing, but returning, carrying a justice that arrived late, yet strong enough to crush evil. Justice may come late, but when it arrives, it asks permission from no one. Subscribe to the channel and share this story so that no one will ever be suffocated by silence again.